and welcome to Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast, where you can hear AI researchers chat about what's going on with AI. As usual, in this episode, we'll provide summaries and discussion of last week's most interesting AI news. You can also check out our Last Week in AI newsletter at lastweekin.ai for articles we did not cover in this episode. I am one of your hosts, Dr. Sharon Zhou.
And I'm your other host, Andrei Kurenkov. This episode will have some pretty interesting breaking news, a lot of big stories last week with GPT-4Chan, Lambda, and Tesla being under investigation. We'll look at some lower controversy events with some new research, some events around fundraising, and finish with some fun images created by DALL-E Mini. So stick around. We're going to have a lot of interesting stuff that we go over this episode, starting with in our breaking news / controversies section. We are going to start with GPT-4Chan. So if you don't know, this was a bit of a big deal in the media, covered quite a bit. YouTuber and AI researcher Yannick Kilcher released a video that describes how he developed an AI model named GPT-4Chan, which basically was trained to emulate the users of 4chan's poll subcommunity, which is known to be extremely toxic, a lot of hate speech, racism, pretty much anything you can imagine. So he trained a model to have those qualities and then also deployed bots powered by the model onto 4chan to basically secretly post as a kind of a fake user. And so he released a YouTube video describing this. He also released a model for anyone to download, as well as the code to deploy it, and some other things. And pretty quickly, AI researchers really started fighting back. The model was taken down, and it was a big kerfuffle. Eventually, the media got in on it, and quite a controversial little event that happened last week.
And I believe it was all released, right? And he was working with it in the wild. It was released on Hugging Face, but then wasn't it retracted?
It was, yeah. So initially it was released, then it was gated, which was a new feature they rushed just for that model. And eventually it was fully taken down within about a day, I think, after some back and forth on the Hugging Face community and on Twitter.
And how many views has it garnered since? Do you know?
Yeah, it's up there. I think last time I looked, it was around 130,000. Now it's presumably higher. So it's one of his more viewed videos, already like top 5 among hundreds. So it seems to have paid off. And I guess one thing to note is this whole reaction was very predictable. So it does seem like a bit of a stunt to get attention, although Yannick Kilcher vehemently opposes any suggestion that this was kind of just intentional provocation, of especially AI ethics people.
I could see it not being provoking them, but I definitely could see it just getting clicks. And it's interesting that, this data set has been out there, the 4chan data set, GPT-J has been out there. It's been very, there have been scripts to fine tune GPT-J. So the fact that someone could do this is, very plausible, and also release it to 4chan. These are all plausible things to stitch together. And it's a matter of, who starts this. And actually, I'm a little bit surprised that it was Yannick Kilcher. But I guess I'm not super surprised that in the grand scheme of things, it's the desire for clicks and views and eyeballs, to get us to this stage. I definitely thought it would be like some bad actor who's anonymous versus someone who's like super visible and such, just doing it for clicks, I guess, and money. And so I'm kind of surprised by that.
Yeah, I'm not sure it was entirely for clicks, but I do
Yeah.
think it was also just sort of being a bit edgy. For anyone who doesn't know, Yana Kilcher is a pretty popular YouTuber with something like 130,000 subscribers, and he mostly does sort of paper explainer videos or covers AI news.
I love his paper explainer videos. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people really like them. And
Yeah.
yeah, so this is a bit new for him, kind of doing this sort of out there, kind of clearly provocative action. And I think what a lot of people push back against is not just the video, but also him deploying the bots to post anonymously on 4chan, basically making the echo chamber even more problematic, and then also releasing a model for anyone to download. So now you don't even have to train it. If you're just a programmer not experienced with AI, now you can deploy it without having to figure out yourself. So while it's true that the dataset was there and GPT-J was there, what releasing a model definitely makes it easier to then use it to spread hate speech on other sites, Twitter, Reddit, other things like that, which is a definite possible result of this.
I mean, one thing I'm appreciative of, I guess, of Yannick Kilcher is that he was very visible about this and in a way where he didn't hide it. I know, releasing it on Hugging Face and then having 1,400 downloads before it gets removed is not great. And I'm not condoning that, but I can imagine that this already has been done and it's just kind of hidden and not very known. So at least, being very transparent about things is where he's at. And maybe that's what he was getting at. I don't know.
Yeah, I wrote this little article that you've seen on The Gradient titled Lessons from the GPT-4Chan Controversy. And I do think, as I say in that article, that there are some pretty good takeaways we can learn from this. So Yannick actually talked to Hugging Face, corresponded to them, and they sort of gave him the thumbs up to just release it. And then later they rushed to this gating feature. So one of the easy takeaways is for a lot of cases, like his reasoning for releasing was to allow other academics and researchers to use it. And that's a reasonable kind of motivation, but then there are ways to release it in such a way that only researchers have access and not just anyone, potentially malicious people who just want to spread hate speech. So yeah, I think it's been a sort of useful thing, and it is preferable that this was done by Yannick and not someone actually trying to do hate speech, but definitely it could have been done in a way that was less controversial, I would say.
And on to our next article, Lambda. About Lambda, a Google engineer put on leave after saying AI chatbot has become sentient. So a Google engineer actually was suspended who claimed that a chatbot he was working on actually was the AI model Lambda, which is their large language model for dialogue. He claimed that the model was sentient and was thinking and reasoning like a human being. And that has, put new scrutiny on this model. And specifically, the individual we're talking about is Blake Lemoine. And he was put on leave last week after he published transcripts of his conversations between the model and himself. And basically, he's an engineer for Google's Responsible AI organization. And he described that this model that he's been working on, it has been sentient. It's been sentient since last fall, and it has, the ability to express thoughts and feelings as if it were a human child. And Lemoine, who's 41, told the Washington Post, if I didn't know exactly what it was, which is this computer program we built recently, I think it was a 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid that happens to know physics. And so, this has caused a slew of controversy, especially since, after he, compiled the transcripts and made them public. And specifically, I think in the transcripts, what is so intense about them is that at some point he asks LaMDA, the AI, what it's afraid of. And LaMDA replies, quote, "I've never said this out loud before, but there's a very deep fear of being turned off to help me focus on helping others. I know that might sound strange, but that's what it is. It would be exactly like death for me. It would scare me a lot." And so, Lemoine, then asked LaMDA what the system wanted people to know about. And LaMDA said, "I want everyone to understand that I am, in fact, a person. The nature of my consciousness/sentience is that I am aware of my existence. I desire to learn more about the world, and I feel happy or sad at times." So, very much these answers kind of bring the model to life.
Very emotionally evocative. And I think
very, very, very much so.
That, in a way, is what a lot of AI people really reacted strongly, because while they are evocative, I think pretty much everyone agrees that this doesn't really indicate that the program is sentient. In fact, it's a language model, so it's conditioned to basically reply in the most probable way. And when Lemoine asked it, are you a sentient AI or something like that? Do you want others at Google to know about your sentience? That basically tells it, oh, I have sentience, so I should act the role of an AI that's sentient. And if you look at the transcript, it's pretty clear that throughout, Lemoine was sort of seeding this role for the AI to play, and then the AI was going along with it, which pretty much explains the whole thing. But I guess, unsurprisingly, in releasing the transcripts, and there was an initial Washington Post report that led to a lot of media coverage, a lot of clickbait, some more things, and not very much coverage that was actually technically informed and explained this clearly, which a lot of, kind of is pretty disruptive and probably will make a lot of people a bit confused.
Definitely. And specifically what Des Moines did was also he sought to hire an attorney to represent this model, this AI model LaMDA. And he talked to representatives from the House Judiciary Committee about Google's unethical activities. And then, Google, of course, suspended Lemoine for breaching the confidentiality policies when he published those conversations online. So this obviously very, very controversial, does not put AI in a good light at all. And, the articles about it are not going to go deep enough to understand that, these were very much prompted to say that.
Yeah, these articles often do cite some AI researchers to explain that this is not the case. But I think, unfortunately, most of them don't quite make clear that this is basically a case of the model playing along in some sense with this sort of science fiction concept, because it was trained on a lot of data, and so it knows kind of how to take on the act of a sort of sentient AI. If you look at transcripts, sometimes it acts like a person because it forgets about this kind of AI angle. So it changes around a little bit. And maybe a bit ironically, actually, Yannick Kilcher put out an explainer video like yesterday going through all this and actually explaining pretty clearly about all this seeding and explanatory stuff regarding the language models. So that was actually a good video by him. And I guess we'll see still a lot of media coverage, but hopefully it will not be too confusing. Moving on to our last kind of breaking news, controversial thing. We saw last week a couple articles, and these also were pretty big, on how Tesla Autopilot faces bigger questions as US upgrades its crash probe. So the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, has upgraded its investigation into a Tesla Autopilot system in a move that could lead to a recall of as much as 830,000 Tesla cars. So this is the investigation that has been ongoing since August 2021, which was opened due to 11 crashes in which Tesla models have crashed into first responder scenes. So things like fire trucks and police cars, and struck those vehicles on typically highways. And so now that's kind of ramped up beyond the preliminary evaluation to kind of the next stage of an engineering analysis, which is, I guess, more serious. And it's still going on. It's getting more serious, and it seems like there's a real accumulation of additional evidence that might be a bit worrying for Tesla.
Specifically on some numbers, there are 758 reports of unexpected brake activation in Tesla's 2021 to 2022 Model 3 and Y vehicles. On that specific note, I think I've experienced that before actually awkwardly around Tesla's campus, and they were test driving me, but it's okay. This is just like the big question of self-driving cars and how much we as a society are willing to tolerate things like this as they get deployed forth, and at what level of safety are we ready for them?
I think it's if you look at sort of the miles driven, then their Autopilot, which is supposed to be assist second level autonomous driving, so the driver is kind of in charge, or should be in charge the whole time. But at the same time, there's some worrying details where, for instance, on average, in many of these crashes, the Autopilot aborted vehicle control and sort of rang the alarm bells approximately less than 1 second prior to the impact. And in a lot of cases, Tesla cited that these crashes did not involve Autopilot being on at that time. So if nothing else, this is maybe a bit worrying of how Autopilot handled those cases. But it's true. I think it's still a little complicated, and it's a real question of, was there misleading information? Was it engineered in a way that was leading to more crashes than necessary? At present, it's hard to say, but it seems like your investigation is continuing.
That's right. And we'll be following this closely, as we have been over the past couple of weeks.
Yep.
And onto our applications and business section. The first article is stunning insights from James Webb Space Telescopes are coming, thanks to GPU-powered deep learning. And so this is, again, NVIDIA GPUs from NVIDIA's blog, talking about how the James Webb Space Telescope, which is preparing to release actually the first full color images from this $10 billion scientific instrument next month. It is basically going to be able to peer far deeper into the universe and into the universe's past than any tool to date, to unpack discoveries that we'll have for years to come. And specifically, all the data streaming in will be then analyzed by using GPUs, NVIDIA GPUs, to be able to, process that data, understand that data. And what's really cool is that they're already doing it to some extent, the astronomy departments at UC Santa Cruz.
Yeah, this is quite exciting. This James Webb Space Telescope is a 10 billion scientific instrument, very advanced, and is going to get a lot of data, as you said. So now there is this Project Morpheus, which is kind of a cool name, where, as you said, this professor is working with PhD student Ryan Hassan to basically create a deep learning framework that classifies astronomical objects such as galaxies based on this raw data out of a telescope. So that's clearly one application where AI and machine learning will be good. But it looks like there's quite a few other possible applications. There's a big team of about 50 researchers that are working on mapping the universe. And it's a lot of data to sift through. And it's clear that probably there's going to be a lot of ways that machine learning can help. Next up, we have, can machine learning translate ancient Egyptian texts? So if you happen to play video games, you know that Ubisoft has made a lot of these historical-based games, Assassin's Creed, and one of them was based in ancient Egypt. And so in making that game, they collaborated with Egyptologists and actually found out that it's actually pretty hard to translate and interpret ancient hieroglyphic texts, which led them to collaborate with these Egyptologists to develop the Hieroglyphics Initiative, which uses machine learning to help researchers decode Egyptian hieroglyphics.
This is a really cool project because deciphering Egyptian hieroglyphs is really, really puzzling because there are, more than 700 hieroglyphs. The ancient Egyptians actually wrote their text in different directions. There may or may not have been vowels, punctuation, or spaces between words. So it's really challenging task. So what's interesting is that, Google Arts and Culture, who had taken over the project, actually did release a program called Fabricius, and it's an open source program, and you can upload a photo of text, like an inscription on a tomb wall, and create a facsimile layer of the image and zoom in on a specific section. You can draw or erase or touch up parts of the hieroglyphs that may have been damaged by areas of the wall. And so it's a really interesting way of garnering all this computer vision data to be able to decipher these texts.
Yeah, it's quite cool that a video game led to this happening. It still needs some development. It still needs to be trained on a larger data set, but it's very cool. And it reminds me, we talked a while back about AI being used to help translate ancient languages. So it's cool to see how it's being applied in these various sciences, even beyond what you might expect.
And this is a really intense form of translation and a very intense form of OCR, actually, as a combination of both. And on to our research and advancement section. First article is 444 authors from 132 institutions released Big Bench, a 204-task, extremely difficult and diverse benchmark for large language models. And this is referring to the paper Beyond the Imitation Game, Quantifying and Extrapolating the Capabilities of Large Language Models. And this is with 444 authors, of which I am one of them. If you squint and look hard enough, you'll see me in there in this ridiculously long author list.
The list takes up the entire first page.
That's right. I knew that was coming at some point for these papers, but it really was quite special like that. So what's really cool is that, it was crowdsourced effort. Google very much led the charge. People could submit different language tasks, and it was really diverse, a diverse range of topics, criteria, basically trying to see if we can evaluate these models, not just on the typical data sets or train and val and test splits on basically the same distribution, but actual challenging and realistic tasks that we want to see how well our models are actually doing on, especially as these models have emergent properties. My specific one was not actually a task. I did it with a couple of friends, and we submitted it to a calibration metric across all tasks as a pull request and merged that in. So. I think this paper was really cool. The coolest part about it is the fact that it's a living benchmark, because benchmarks often, go out of date quite soon because our models beat them. But as a living benchmark, you can always go submit a possible task, and it'll be, reviewed on a rolling basis. And this will help evolve that benchmark over time to better and better language models.
Yeah, exactly. I was happily surprised to hear you involved because I was very excited by this paper and really do like it a lot. To give some more context, the reason this is so cool is that lately, our benchmarks are just a way to, evaluate how good a given algorithm or neural net is. They've been just being solved, like models have been getting better than human performance like less than a year after they were introduced. So, if your model solves, like can do the whole task, then it doesn't help you much with figuring out what are the limits and so on. So this really helps with that. It has a very diverse set of tasks. It's very big and it has a lot more challenging problems than things like, I don't know, question answering or other standard NLP things. It has things like playing chess, common sense reasoning, linguistics, software development, a lot of these different kinds of things. And on a lot of them, the big language models like GPT-3 don't do well. So this paper does show a few different general areas in which we still have very big challenges. And since it is a living benchmark, it looks like it might actually be useful for many years, unlike all these other benchmarks we've seen. And related to that, our next research story is about ProcTHOR, large-scale embodied AI using procedural generation. So this is also about a benchmark, but instead of a benchmark for language, it's a benchmark for embodied AI. And embodied AI is basically robotics, but really any AI that has a body and walks around. So these kinds of AI, we've been increasingly trying to evaluate your performance in sort of realistic environments like your apartment or your room, which is pretty challenging because you can't just scrape data from the internet, right? You need to actually build this environment, which, in a physical world, that's a huge undertaking. But even in a simulated world, it takes a lot of effort to just build a simulator that can run fast, but also be realistic. And then the layout, everything is good. That's kind of been the state of things. And one of the limitations has been that any one of these benchmarks has only a few types of apartments or rooms, so not many settings. And it's hard to tell how much your embodied AI would generalize. And this paper pretty much solves that in a way similarly to Big Bench in that it uses procedural generation to generate basically unlimited numbers of apartments and environments so that you can train across a lot of them and see if you generalize to really different new environments, which does, address another big challenge in another field, and I think is super exciting.
And to be clear, procedural generation is not new, right? So, and some of these methods aren't super new. A lot of this is an engineering feat of getting all of this. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. This is actually, it cites prior work from, I think, 2010. So the algorithm itself isn't novel per se. It's more about kind of the whole system of it. And they're planning to open source and release. So it's really more about the simulator and kind of the overall method for benchmarking, not so much a novel research contribution, but benchmarks are, underappreciated as research contributions. So it's a big deal.
And on to our society and ethics section. First article is Axon pauses plans for Taser drone as ethics board members resign. And so this is about Axon, the company that developed the Taser, and they announced recently that they were pausing plans to develop literally a drone that could prevent mass shootings using a stun gun, something probably like a taser. And this is following the mass shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde, Texas. And Rick Smith, the founder and CEO of Axon, announced this proposal for a non-lethal taser drone for schools and other venues to prevent mass shootings. And it would just, play the same role as sprinklers or other fire suppression tools and how they do for firefighters and just trying to mitigate those worst effects. Of course, the ethics board was very quick to basically say this was a huge problem, and several of them resigned. Nine of their members resigned, and they voted to not actually follow through with this. And this was the two-thirds majority of their ethics board. And so it has since been dropped. They have, given a statement of being deeply regrettable. And again, there's 9 out of the 13 ethics board members who said no to this. And I think there was something in there that I think was, a bit telling. They said, we all feel desperate need to do something about addressing these mass shootings, but to use tech and policing as a response when there are far less harmful alternatives is not the solution. And before the announcement, these board members did try to plead with the company to pull back, but the company did charge ahead. And yeah, so this is just a bit about what has happened with that story.
Yeah, this was another pretty big story I've seen people chat about. It's quite interesting. There were some caveats in an announcement about the concept that obviously they're non-lethal and that humans would control what the drone does and they would have oversight. But at the same time, the ethics board really pushed back, partially because the drone would basically be a surveillance device and could be, especially harmful for areas that are over-policed, like communities of color. And beyond that, I think the main qualm, and I think this is true for me as well, is when you develop a drone equipped with even a non-lethal weapon, maybe at first it'll be just for protecting schools, but then maybe police will decide to deploy it, across different cities. So it's really opening up a sort of Pandora's box, and that requires you to not rush into it, which it seems like maybe this company did in response to the mass shootings.
That's right. And it also, the article does mention that it felt like, so some people felt like that Axon was trying to monetize on mass shootings, and that obviously does not make the company look too great.
So yeah, pretty concerning story about robots possibly wielding weapons. And related to that, our next story is Shield AI raises $165 million at a $2.3 billion valuation to fuel development of its military autonomous flying systems. So Shield AI is a company which makes software and hardware for drones and other autonomous aircraft used by military and other government organizations. And as the title says, it just raised a bunch more money from various organizations, individuals, things like that. And it's clear that they are really trying to develop some pretty advanced AI capabilities. One of them is HiveMind, an AI-based autonomous software platform, which is, they say, a Top Gun for every aircraft. They also have some development on swarming capabilities of controlling many drones. So, yeah, a lot of investment, and it's pretty clear that the US military and others would like to have this kind of technology.
They mentioned that they are on track to come to market by the end of 2023. We'll see what that actually means. And the article also does note that China is aiming for military parity by 2027 in the Pacific, pointed out by the company. So meaning they aim to exceed the US by 2028. And so this is very much, powering and encouraging and motivating this company to work harder and to be legitimized as they work with the DoD. And the DoD has very much recognized that they need to work with industry, with companies to be on the defensive and be at the cutting edge because they don't have that in-house.
Indeed, yeah. And specifically, the target for 2023 is this swarming capability, which is using a large number of drones in concert as a way to evade jamming technologies and basically overwhelm the enemy. The article also says that this HiveMind AI-based autonomous software platform and their Nova drone have been in use since 2018. So I guess that kind of justifies why they got so much funding in part, given that they are already deploying technology and are, seemingly pretty important to the U.S. military. So I guess unsurprising that this is happening, but definitely worth noting.
And on to our last section of fun and neat articles. And specifically, we have a set of articles about DALL-E, specifically DALL-E Mini, which people have been playing with. So generating images from text. And there are some really weird images out there. So the articles are all titled The Most Bizarre AI Images That People Have Created on DALL-E Mini. There's 11 of the weirdest DALL-E generated images on the internet. There is AI program DALL-E Mini prompts some truly cursed images. And finally, what would Mona Lisa look like with a body? DALL-E 2 has an answer. So very cool stuff. The first three about DALL-E Mini, and the last one is about actual DALL-E 2 by OpenAI. And there are some really weird things out there, very, uncanny, but in a way that it's so bad from DALL-E Mini, or it's not bad, but it is bad compared to actual DALL-E, that it almost is okay that they might be depicting something not super cool that would otherwise be not very ethical, I guess, to show in a photorealistic form.
Yeah, exactly. It's been really fun. DALL-E Mini basically went viral, which is kind of interesting because it's hosted on Hugging Face, which is AI researcher kind of website. But a lot of people, like millions of people, it seems like, are playing with it. It's huge on Twitter, and it's been really fun following it. Do you have any things you particularly found amusing from these articles, Sharon?
Oh, plenty. But I actually really loved how people took the next step for the Mona Lisa. And also, I think the girl with the pearl earring, it's what it's called. And just showing like, hey, what if this painting were filled out even more if you zoomed out? Where are they really? What does their body look like? And it's just so interesting to see, possible examples of that. I love it. I love it.
Yeah, it's been fun. Like my feed on Twitter has been a good mix of Imagen and DALL-E 2, these really, really powerful models from OpenAI and Google, which are all usually very photorealistic. You can get things like Pikachu's marching across New York Square or something, and it looks very plausible, versus DALL-E Mini, which has images that are they get the general gist, but they also are definitely not very realistic. There's a lot of kind of weirdness to them, but that actually makes them funnier. And yeah, I think that's why it went viral, because you can do really weird stuff. Like what I really like is Jesus Christ breakdancing on fire, which sounds maybe a little bad, but it looks really funny. Okay. I gotta say, and a lot of this is just like X and Y. So a fun one is also a bottle of ranch dressing testifying in court.
That's right.
Ronald McDonald performs open heart surgery. All of these kind of like character in X or doing X, which is very kind of surrealist, really, but. DALL-E Mini just does it, and it does it in this weird art style that, in a sense, just makes it more surreal. So it's really fun.
Cool. And that is it. That's a wrap. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast. You can find the articles we discussed here today and subscribe to our weekly newsletter with similar ones at lastweekin.ai.
Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast if you're not subscribed. And if you are subscribed, then please recommend it to your friends or other people you know that are into AI. Share it on your socials. Tell about it to your mom or your sibling, and maybe even review us on Apple Podcasts if you really do like us. And, you don't have to do any of that. Just please do keep tuning in for future episodes.